Good evening and welcome to another online event by Prometheas Hellenic Society. My name is Alex Biliotopoulos and I'm a Vice President of Prometheas. I welcome you to another online event. Unfortunately, because the COVID situation has not improved to the point that we can have our usual meetings in person. And so we've been trying to keep up with this online platform and move our planned and new presentations to it. So tonight we have a very exciting presentation by Dr. Bill Parkinson, who is a professor at the Department of Anthropology at the University of Illinois in Chicago, and he's also the Curator of Anthropology at the Field Museum of Natural History. Dr. Parkinson has degrees from the St. Petersburg State University in Russia and degrees in anthropology from the University of Illinois at Chicago, as well as his master's and PhD from the University of Michigan. He is a specialist in European and Eastern Mediterranean prehistory, and his research explores social dynamics of early village societies and the emergence of early states. He's the American director of a large archaeological project in Hungary, and he's also the American co-director of the Diros project, which is in the regional, in the Western Mani Peninsula in southern Greece, of which he will give us a presentation on tonight. Dr. Parkinson, thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. It's a real pleasure to get asked to do something. I actually shaved. I got a haircut for the first time in several months because everybody's stuck at home. So this is really wonderful to have this opportunity to talk to you tonight and to tell you a little bit about myself and also about this wonderful archaeological research project that I've had the luxury of being involved with for over a decade now. So thank you so much. What I'd like to do tonight is talk a little bit about my interests as an anthropologist and as an archaeologist, and then talk a little bit about those interests and how they relate to early European farming villages. And then I want to talk a little bit about museum exhibitions and archaeology, which is actually how I met Connie Mortoupalas when she was at the National Hellenic Museum in Chicago. And then we'll finally get to sort of the main story here, the main event, which will take us to where we are here, Diros Bay in the southern Peloponnesos. So just to start, I think it's important to note that we're living in a very odd time. It's a very odd time not only because of the pandemic and all of the issues of social justice that are going on in the world, but within the breadth of humanity, we're living in a weird time because we live in a primarily urban environment. And this is really, really striking. You know, as humans, we evolved to live in small hunting and gathering groups, and that was our niche for tens of thousands of years. But at some point in 2008, we really hit a watershed moment where over half of all of the people, right, which is like 7 billion people, live in urban environments. And that's a real big change. That number is going to increase over time, and that creates a lot of issues for us as a society that we have to wrestle with. I live in the wonderful city of Chicago, and it's striking to me that now more than half of all the people on the face of the earth live in urban environments like Chicago or Washington, D.C., and along with that come a lot of other things. Extreme inequalities in wealth that are part of this general trend of a more urban humanity that we live in. This is from 2017, when Oxfam reported that 8 humans owned half of all of the wealth in the world. This is actually leveled out. Now it's like 15 people. But these kinds of really incredible differences and inequalities in economic and political sectors are something that we've never experienced, and it's something that we have to figure out as a society if we're going to be successful. Now, as an archaeologist, I think about this in the real big term, right? So my research focuses over here on these early farming villages. The earlier watershed moment was when all of those hunting and gathering societies settled down, which happened in many different parts of the world. And that established a period that we call the Neolithic period. And that happened in different parts of the world after the end of the Pleistocene, anywhere from about 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. In Europe, it happened about 9,000 years ago when we got the earliest farmers in Greece. And what we've done as a discipline is we got really good. We know where agriculture happened. We know where hunters and gatherers became farmers. But we haven't done, I think, a really good job of understanding, once you get these farming villages, what happens? What happens to these societies? Why do we get early cities in places like Crete during the Bronze Age, centered around the Palace of Knossos, the large Minoan palace? Why then do we get places like Pylos in the southern Peloponnesos during the Mycenaean period, or Mycenae during the Mycenaean period? We haven't done a really good job of understanding those dynamics within those early farming villages that make some of them big and that make other ones stay small. The point that I want to make here is that of those tens of thousands, I'm only showing you the last 10,000 years of human prehistory. The vast majority of human prehistory is prehistoric. It's before writing. And our only way to get at what was going on in those ancient societies is through archaeology. And so this is what I want to talk about. One of my own personal interests is an inherent bias in archaeology. And that is that in archaeology, we see the successes. We see the societies that worked. We see the things that caught on. And as a result, we have a very biased view of history and prehistory. What I'm interested in are those instances where there was what I call a false start. People who know the NFL, and they know this guy at Hockey, the referee with the big arms. A false start in football happens when everybody lines up at the line of scrimmage. They're going to run a play, and then something goes wrong. It doesn't work. And I believe in the human past, there are more instances of these false starts towards things like urbanism, false starts towards things like hierarchical societies that didn't always work. And so what I'm interested in doing is examining these false starts to figure out why it didn't work in some instances and why it worked in other instances. I've had the luxury of doing this in two different parts, sort of distantly related parts of Southeastern Europe. I've run a project in Hungary for over 2 decades, and I've been involved in Greek archaeology for nearly 3 decades. As a result, what I'm going to talk about today is only my research in Greece. I'm not going to have time to talk about my research. There's my dog. My research in Hungary. I also want to spend a little bit of time talking about my position as a museum curator. In that position as a museum curator, I'm frequently asked, and this is one of the great things about having both an academic position as a professor, but also a position as a museum curator, I'm frequently asked to work beyond my comfort zone. Now, I've told you what I study. I study early villages in Southeastern Europe. But having been at the Field Museum for 12 years now, they've asked me to do exhibitions on everything from Genghis Khan to Vikings. As a result, it was a real pleasure for me about 6 years ago when I was asked to lead an exhibition on ancient Greece, finally something near and dear to my heart. Many of you might have seen this exhibition. This was a truly collaborative international project that included the Field Museum, The exhibition was actually led by the Canadian Museum of History in Gatineau, Quebec. And we worked in Chicago with the National Hellenic Museum to bring this exhibition to the city of Chicago, as well as to eventually Washington, D.C. at the National Geographic Museum. And this is where I met Connie Mortoupalas, and we had a lot of fun putting this exhibition together. It was a true partnership between the National Hellenic Museum here in Chicago, with funding by John Calamos through the foundation, to support this exhibition, which was really just an amazing opportunity for me. Not as a Greek, my last name's Parkinson, it's not Parkinsonopoulos, but as a Hellenophile and someone who spent decades of my life working on the ancient Greek past, this was just an incredible opportunity to really let people see through the eyes of ancient Greek people, to learn about ancient Greek society and to learn about how it changed from the Neolithic all the way up through the time of Alexander the Great. So that's something I will forever cherish as one of the things I'm very, very proud of in my career. That also led to other publications. For example, this was really a children's book that was a supplement, an educational book that we produced that was related to the Greeks exhibition. And this was something that's also very fun for me, and it builds on sort of my more boring, typical academic research, which prior to about 12 years ago in Greece focused mostly on the Bronze Age, and specifically the Bronze Age of the Greek mainland and the Mycenaean period on the Greek mainland. Okay, now we're getting into the main event here. What I'd like to talk about today is a project that we call the Diros Project. And this is situated here. Here we are. We're in the southern Peloponnesos here. This is the Mani Peninsula. And here we're in the southern bit of the Mani Peninsula. We're not up in Messenian Mani down here. We're down in the inner Mani. And we're on the western part, just south of Hellenic Bay, in the next bay south, which is called Diros Bay. Now, those of you who've been to Mani know that it's a very special place in Greece. Not only has it been a place that has had a special history and a special past, culturally, it's very different, even from many other parts of the Peloponnesos. And that is in large part due to this massive mountain range called the Taygetos Mountains that really separate Mani from the rest of the Peloponnese. And this geographic barrier, which has been there since this area was first inhabited by people at least 70,000 years ago, based on the earliest dates from Apidima Cave, which is just up the road from us. It's always been a little different. Mani's always been separate. And what I always find fascinating about Mani is that it's insular in the sense that it's carved off from the rest of the Peloponnese, but it's not like the islands. The islands have their own culture. The Mani really has a very distinct character within Greece. And you can hear this in everything from funerary songs to attitudes towards foreigners. This is at the very southern tip. This is Cape Tainaron. This is as far south as you can go in Mani, in Europe actually, and still be on the European continent. This wonderful lighthouse here. Many people know about Mani through the writings of Patrick Leigh Fermor, the British travel writer from the 20th century, who traveled all throughout Mani. He's over here on the left, staring down a goat. And what Fermor wrote about in Mani was this amazingly sort of archaic part of Greece where people were still living in towers. And they built these massive towers as the result of blood feuds between very strong families that competed for very, very critical resources in this very arid, rugged part of southern Greece. And one of the things that we've learned is that there's a long history to those towers. In fact, some of those towers and some of that kind of social organization of this tribal sort of social organization where people are organized into large families goes back at least to the Byzantine period and perhaps as early as the end of the Roman period. These are some of these massive megalithic settlements. This central block here is about the size of a Volkswagen, and that's a lintel that puts you in the entrance to a very large enclosed settlement located just adjacent to Diros Bay. Other people know Mani from the sanctuary and death oracle of Poseidon that's located in Tainaron. At the very southern tip of the Mani Peninsula, there is a temple of Poseidon that goes back to at least the Archaic period. And this is one of the areas that could have been the entrance to Hades. Now, anybody who knows anything about classical antiquity will tell you that there's a lot of disputes about where the entrance to Hades realm was. And this is one that has been passed down and has sort of lived in local culture for quite a long time. What brought us to this part of Greece, this exceptional, rugged, isolated, special part of Greece, is a cave called Alepotrypa. As you know, Alepotrypa, Foxhole Cave. And that's located in this bay, Diros Bay. So here we are, just one, Areopoli is just around the corner here, right over this hill. And Lemeni Bay is just beyond that. This is Diros Bay. Like I said, it's not a bad place to work. This is really a wonderful place to have spent several years of my life with wonderful colleagues and wonderful friends in the region. Most people who have been into Diros, they know Diro from Licada, from another set of caves that you're pushed through on vaques. You push through on these little gondolas with people who push you through and tell you stories about the paleontological finds that come out of these massive caves that actually go several kilometers back into the hill. But what brought us here is a cave that's just adjacent to those. And that's not at sea level, it's above sea level. And it's called Alepotrypa. This is a project that was organized under the direction of a very famous Greek archaeologist, Dr. Yorgos Papathanassopoulos, who was retired even in the late 2008 that I got involved. He was already retired at that point. And it was through him and my colleague Anastasia Papathanassiou, who works at the FREF for the Ministry of Culture, the FREF of Speleology and Paleoanthropology in Greece, that I was asked to join this project with her colleague, Panagiotis Karkanas, who's now at the Wiener Laboratory as part of the American School of Classical Studies in Greece, and my colleague who's now at the University of Michigan named Michael Galati. We worked to bring my former colleague from Florida State University, Daniel Pullen, in to help direct our apotheke and our laboratory. And it was one of my former graduate students at the time, Rebecca Seafried, who was working with us to pull together a lot of our GIS, our geographic information for the project. One of the great things about archaeology is that it's truly a team sport, and it requires the effort of a bunch of different people who have different kinds of expertise and specialties. And here I'm just listing the archaeologists. This doesn't include our friends, the entire Kyriakos family, who puts up with us every single year when we invade Diros with our massive team, and live with them, and they help us find food, and Zembilia for taking away dirt from the site, and people to build fences for us. It's truly a team effort every single time. And I'm very lucky to have been a part of this project. And so I get to stand here and tell you about it, but it's really all these people that should be able to take the credit. Here are my colleagues, Anastasia Papatanasiou and Takis Karkanas. We're looking at a map here, trying to figure out how to map a site in Diros. And here's my colleague, Mike Galati, and the late Yorgos Papathanassopoulos, and his dog, Zuzu, who went with him absolutely everywhere. So that's right, if you were paying attention, my colleagues are Papathanassopoulos, Papatanasiou, Karkanas, Galati, and I'm Parkinson. There's always got to be one that doesn't belong. Projects like this require a lot of money. And in this case, we were successful in getting funding, acquiring funding from several different places, including the Institute for Aegean Prehistory, the National Geographic Society. We received a grant from the Shelby White and Leon Levy Foundation to publish the results of our research. We also got a Werner Gren grant. We received a grant from the Archaeological Institute of America, money from the Field Museum, and from donors and viewers like you. Okay, so as I mentioned, I was asked to join the project in 2008, and we established a very clear methodology, and that was to work on the cave itself and to publish the results of the excavations from Alepotrypa, which I'll tell you about in a minute. We also wanted to do a survey to put that cave site into a broader framework to understand how that cave and the people that were using that cave during the Neolithic period related to other sites around it, and also to conduct excavations outside the cave, which had never been done, on this promontory called Xagunaki. Okay, so Alepotrypa. So if we shoot back to the 1960s, Yorgos Papathanassopoulos was the EFOR. He was the administrator in the archaeological service in Sparti, in charge of all of Laconia, this entire chunk of the southern Peloponnesos. And the cave was discovered, and it's a traditional story of a very small hole and a very small dog that goes down a very small hole, and someone climbs in to find their dog, and they discover this massive, massive cave. This happened in the late 1950s, and immediately the Greek speleological, the Greek Office of Tourism decided to blast it open it up, and have a sound and light show inside the cave. The cave system that was discovered, and what you're looking at here is the distribution of the cave. So this is a top-down model, and this is overlaid on top of an old topographic aerial photograph, from the 1950s. So here's the bay. You can see the bay here. This was the entrance to the cave. These up here are all agricultural terraces. This is a road right here to give you scale. And you can see this cave goes back several hundred meters into the mountain. It's not unlike the other caves, which are at sea level down here. But it's connected to a completely different karstic system. Well, immediately they said, well, we need a road. We're going to blast this all out. So they start bringing in the dynamite. They bring in the bulldozers. They blast back the entrance of the cave. And we go within a few years from this pristine shoreline to this. So just to give you another look at this, this is what it looked like when the cave was discovered. You'll notice there are no roads down here. These are all footpaths and calderemia, old paved footpaths. And here we are with the road, the museum, the entrance to the other caves. This is a really important point, and I'll come back to this. Now, at this point, Yorgos Papathanassopoulos is sitting in his office in Sparta, and the workmen bring to him baskets full of ceramics, baskets full of human bones, including several human skulls. And Yorgos puts a stop to the development of the cave. And what Yorgos discovered when he implemented scientific excavations beginning in the 1960s and really hitting their stride in the mid-1970s was a Neolithic Pompei. Everywhere that you walked inside the cave, you were stepping on ceramic vessels. These are all ceramic vessels. And you can see this is just a surface in a niche within the cave that is paved with Neolithic ceramic vessels. This right here is actually a vothros, what we call a bothros in ancient Greek. This is a storage pit that has been filled in with ancient vessels. There also was an unprecedented number of burials inside the cave. And not only burials, not only human inhumation burials where people are being laid out and put into pits, complete, but also ossuaries where people are bringing pieces of people and putting them in niches within the cave, including, in some cases, just skulls. We have niches with just human skulls that are being brought into the cave and placed in specific niches. And then all throughout the cave are thousands of different parts of human bodies that have been intentionally brought to the cave and distributed inside the cave. It was very clear to Yorgos that he had discovered a very important Neolithic site. It was also clear that the site had been inhabited from the very moment that agricultural villagers had lived in Southern Europe. From the very moment you got farming villages in Southern Greece, people were using this cave for these very elaborate, very extensive burial rituals. And those people didn't live in a vacuum. Those people were plugged into a much larger world. So we also see from within the cave things like this spondylus shell bracelet. Spondylus are deep sea shells. You need to dive to get them, and they come from far out in the Aegean. Copper knives. This copper comes from Attica. Silver, that also comes from up around Attica. Obsidian. Obsidian is a volcanic glass that in the Aegean only comes from the island of Milos. This is marble. This is a marble figurine that comes from Naxos or Paros in the Cycladic Islands. So these farmers were using this cave for these elaborate burial rituals, and they were plugged into this much larger world. This is a map of the cave, and this is one of the things that's most frustrating for me when I talk about the cave, is trying to give people a sense of how awesome, and I mean that in the literal sense of the word, how truly awe-inspiring this cave is. You know, you enter here from that blasted back entrance, and you enter a room that, you know, is the size of a small house. It's not very large. And then you go through some tubes and you drop down about 15 meters. And then there's an area where you have to crawl through. And then you get to this point here. And this point here opens on this massive, massive chamber. And you could fit an entire football field end to end inside this chamber. And at the back of that chamber is a lake, a freshwater lake. Now these caves were all carved by freshwater. They were carved by aquifers that's dumping through the limestone and over millions of years carving them out. We're in southern Greece. Water is a very, very hot commodity in southern Greece now, and it was a very hot commodity during the Neolithic period. This water, when the cave was originally discovered, was still potable. It was brackish, there was a little salt in it, but it was still potable water. In fact, Yorgos told me that they used it originally in the bathrooms of the museum for the cave system. Oh, I just wanted to mention these guys here. This is a field crew from a filming crew from National Geographic that were here. And as part of the National Geographic exhibition on ancient Greece, they produced a wonderful, wonderful three-part series called The Greeks. And if you want to learn more about the cave, it centers very prominently in the very first episode of this three-part series. It's streaming now on Disney, among other places. Okay, so we got involved, and the problem was Yorgos had been working in this cave literally for 30 years and was so overwhelmed with the amount of material from the cave that he was almost paralyzed by how much material there was. And so we were brought in through Yorgos Papapanasopoulos and Anastasia Papapanasiou to work with that team to try to publish that material. And so a large part of our research was dedicated to bringing new methods to understanding and putting into that broader context the work that had been done there over 3 generations by different Greek teams. A big chunk of our work focused on this area up here near the entrance of the cave. This is called B1, Vita Enna. And this trench, Vita Enna, was one of the deepest trenches in the cave. It has over 5 meters of deposit until it reaches a point that we hit a rockfall and we can't get through. And as a result, we were able to bring new techniques, new interesting archaeological techniques to bear to try to understand what happened in the cave over time. This is my colleague, Takis Karkanas, and Takis is an expert in geology and a special part of geology called micromorphology. And what Takis will do is we can look at, as an archaeologist, I can look at an archaeological profile and I can say, oh, there's a layer there and there's a layer there. What Takis does is he goes in and he takes very small chunks of those stratigraphic profiles. Then he takes these chunks that you see here on the right, he impregnates them with epoxy, which makes them hard as a rock, and then carves them down and looks microscopically at the individual layers that create those larger layers. So when I look at a layer that, or a lens that's, a few centimeters thick, Takis can get in and actually look at dozens of lenses. And that provides us real interesting, very important information about how the cave evolved over time. This is a drawing of the interior profile. So we're looking at, this is meters above sea level. And you can see this profile goes nearly 5 meters deep from the top to the bottom. And within that, we can then extract charcoal samples and take out radiocarbon dates to determine exactly how long this sequence was occupied. And what we can see here is that the earliest dates down here go down to about 5,957 BC. That's 6,000 BC or 8,000 years ago, which is the very beginning of the Neolithic period. And here's my colleague, Georgia. She's down digging in the bottom of the this very, very large pit. You can see we've got scaffolding to try to keep the walls up so it doesn't collapse on top of us. And she was actually digging a burial that was down at the very base of this very deep trench. Now, what's interesting is while we can put up some of these boring radiocarbon graphs that show you that, oh, we start here at 6,000 BC and we go all the way to 3,000 BC, which is very interesting because that is the entire Neolithic period. After 3000 BC, we enter the Bronze Age in Greece. And what's really interesting about this cave, and the reason that it's so exceptional, is because something happened at around 3000 BC, right at the end of the Neolithic period. And the cave was not reopened or reoccupied until it was discovered in the late 1950s. So it is truly a Neolithic Pompeii. This is unheard of for every other cave in Greece, which is constantly used by shepherds, it's used by military personnel, it's used by farmers who go in and pull out the bat guano because they want to put it on their fields. It's absolutely exceptional. So this is truly exceptional for the cave. The other thing that's interesting is that if we look at other cases, so that previous, this is just from that Vita Ena trench. If we look at all of the other radiocarbon dates that we have from all of the other parts of the cave, you can see that while there are some early dates, there's a pop right here around 4000 BC. That means that people were using different parts of the cave sporadically from 6000 to 4000 BC. And then around 4000 BC, there's a whole huge flurry of activity inside the cave. I'll come back to that in a minute. That kind of activity includes not only these primary burials at the entrance and ossuaries, as I mentioned, chunks of people, but also scattered bone that's distributed all throughout the cave. The earliest date that we have so far is exactly just beyond 6000 BC from the ossuary right at the entrance. Okay, so one of the things we wanted to do was conduct survey in Diros Bay to try to understand the broader context of the cave and really get a sense for how people were exploiting the broader area. So we started a survey. It was a 3-year survey of very difficult terrain. This whole part of Greece has largely been abandoned. You know, one of the things that's striking about Mani is that not too long after the 1970s, many of the terraces that had been well manicured and well kept up through the 1970s were abandoned and people left. And that makes surveying it very difficult because what you have are big, thorny, spiny bushes everywhere. But we slogged through a lot of it. And what we learned was there are other sites in the area. But what's really interesting is the only Neolithic site is located just outside the entrance to the cave. That's the only other Neolithic material in the entire bay. The other thing that's interesting about this survey is, for example, around Corinth, you can't spit without hitting late Roman pottery. You literally cannot walk through a field without finding late Roman ceramics. Here we only have one instance of very small isolated on the northern end of the bay of late Roman pottery. And here we're starting to see that Mani has been different. Mani has been different not only in historical time, but also in deep time, going all the way back into the Pleistocene when the first people started living in this area. And to hit that home, I want to contrast Mani today, where there's almost nobody there, with Mani in the 17th century, which was one of the most densely populated parts of Greece. This is the work of my former graduate student, Becky Seyfried, who's now at University of Massachusetts Amherst. And her work focused on this period, what happened in Greece after the Byzantine period and under Ottoman rule. She wrote a wonderful dissertation as part of this project. Okay, so the only place that we found Neolithic was on Xalgunaki, this promontory located just, so the entrance to the cave is right over here. This is the promontory that sort of juts out just above the beach. Those are some Germans over there in RVs that camp on the beach all summer long. Here's another view from the sea. This is the Alepotrypa cave entrance right here, and then this is Sagunaki promontory. And the way that we deal with things like this, and I want to hit this home, this is a very different look. You can see all of this development in all of this area right here that at the time was not there when the cave was discovered. And this is a big deal because people don't live in caves. Caves are horrible places to live. Nobody, especially if you have kids. You know, kids, especially when they're little, they fall down a lot. You don't want a kid living in a cave. People use caves. They use them a lot, but you don't live inside a cave. You live outside a cave. You live underneath the overhang in front of a cave. You don't live inside a cave. And so as a result, it's likely that the vast majority of the settlement was located on the slopes in front of the cave leading down to the bay. This is just another look. Here's Alepotrypa cave. This is Sagunaki, the promontory. And so what we do as archaeologists is we identify these sites by walking across the surface and we say, oh, look it, there's Neolithic pottery here. There must be a Neolithic site here. Then to get more fine-tuned resolution, we lay out a grid. And so here we have a 10 by 10 meter grid that we lay out on top of that promontory. And then we pick up all of the stuff on the surface and we can say, oh, look it, there's more ceramics up here. There are more stone tools over here than there are here. And then we can take that information and we can combine it with information collected from geophysics, which is magical these days. We can collect a wealth of information using different geophysical techniques, especially magnetometry and electric resistivity, to then identify different targets under the ground that we can then explore by combining these different methods. So here on the right, we're looking at the surface density map combined with the anomalies we identified using geophysics that then let us go in and say, okay, here's where we want to excavate. These are promising areas. And this is important because excavation is expensive and slow. And so we can be more surgical. It's also destructive. When you dig an archaeological site, you destroy it by removing it from the ground, you destroy that site. And so we want to be as surgical as we can. So what we did was we ended up sinking two different excavation units. The one, and this is the one here located in the bottom of the screen, block 2. And this anomaly turned out to be a house. This turned out to be a structure. This was a stone-built structure that you can see that's actually going up into the profile. They then, when they built the agricultural terrace, this whole hill was terraced for agriculture at some point after the medieval period. They actually filled in the house. They did us a favor and preserved the house for us by filling it in when they created the agricultural terrace. And just so you know, I'm not making this up, we did find a small hearth and we dated that hearth, fire pit, inside the house, and it yielded a date of 3900 BC, so the beginning of the 4th millennium BC. In the other excavation unit, in block 1, we were working at the base of one of these terraces that was eroding out. And we noticed that this terrace is their agricultural terrace that was eroding out. And as we started to dig back into the terrace, we went through the terrace fill and we got down to what were preserved prehistoric layers. And we found a baby burial. And so what you're looking at here is an infant burial. This is a neonate burial located on final Neolithic ceramics. And we carbon dated this, and it dates a little bit earlier than the house that's just nearby, to the end of the 5th millennium BC. And actually, as we started to work more, we started to expose the area in front of that burial, we then found legs. And at first we found 2 legs, and then we found 3 legs, and then we found 4 legs. And these 4 legs belong to a couple. One is a male, we know from DNA. One is a male, one is a female. We call them affectionately the spooners because they actually are spooning You can see their arms are intertwined. Their legs are intertwined. They were an adult couple. But here's the thing. The Greek ministry released, they issued the press release on Valentine's Day. Oh, isn't it cute? These people are in love. They might have been in love, but two healthy people don't die on the same day if everything's going well. And they don't end up in a massive burial pit together if things are going well. So we don't have any information about how they died, but chances are it wasn't good. And just next to the spooning couple, we found more bones. We then had a fifth leg. And as we excavated those bones, what we found were the remains of two other individuals. So while we called the spooning couple the Spooners, we affectionately called these folks the 50 Shades of Grey couple. And they were, you know, this was the 2000s. And we called them the 50 Shades of Grey couple because it appears as though there was a woman who was bound, her hands were behind her back. She was thrown back into this pit and the male was thrown in on top of her. So this is clearly a multiple burial pit. We were not able to establish whether these are two discrete burial pits or whether these folks were all in one large burial pit. And we couldn't do that because of this feature, this located in red, that is just above the 50 Shades of Grey, the other spooning, the other couple. In that case, we came down on stream-rolled cobbles. So this is you can see this is a built feature. It's sort of a semicircle. We only excavated a quarter of it. You can see this is built up with stones that are hewed out on the inside. And there were several layers of these stream-rolled pebbles that were brought in, laid down very carefully, meticulously. Different sizes brought in at different times. And then between those layers of stream-rolled pebbles that are being brought from, you know, several hundred meters away are bones, loads and loads of human bones, disarticulated remains from probably dozens of individuals that are loaded on top of and sandwiched between the layers of those stream-rolled pebbles. There was more bone in this deposit than there was very hard Greek clay to dig. It was very difficult to excavate. So we were excited because in many ways what we're finding on this promontory outside the cave mimics what we see inside the cave. We see burials, we see disarticulated bones, we see ossuaries. This is very exciting until we find, and this was a shock to us, Mycenaean kylikes. So these are Bronze Age vessels that date to the Mycenaean period, nearly 3,000 years after the Neolithic period. And so this was an absolute shock. This is a Mycenaean dagger that dates to the early Mycenaean period. And what's shocking about this is many things. One is that the Mycenaeans, there are no Mycenaean sites in this area. The closest Mycenaean graves are known from Ethiopia and from up near Sparta, where there's a palatial site. The other thing is that Mycenaeans don't do ossuaries. They bury people in tholos tombs, large beehive tombs. They bury people in chamber tombs. They don't bury them in ossuaries. This was quite a find. Just adjacent to that, within this massive set of walls, we also identified some Neolithic disarticulated remains. This is half of an infant burial. This is something that happened. This is not something that is carried away. This is half of a burial. And this is something that was going on in the Neolithic period, where you will frequently find disarticulated remains. And here you can see we've got the skull, we've got the perfectly articulated ribs and upper thorax, but no waist and legs. The plot thickens as we noticed on the side of this hill. What we originally thought were bedrock boulders are actually very large. You can see how massive this boulder is. These are large boulders that are in these linear formations that cross-cut the later agricultural terraces. And we know that these are Neolithic because they're sandwiched within Neolithic deposits, and there are Neolithic deposits up against them. And as we started to map these, they're what you see here in the large, these linear formations, these linear, black linear formations. They cross-cut the later agricultural terraces. And as a result, these are Neolithic megalithic terraces, only they're not big enough for agriculture. They were created for architecture. Elsewhere on the promontory, there's clearly a Neolithic settlement here. People are living here for long periods of time. You know, we've got animal bones, we've got ceramics, we've got stone tools. They're doing all of the things that Neolithic people do within their villages and settlements, and they're there for quite some time. The sheer amount of pottery, 39,000 sherds from these two very small excavation units and nearly 300 kilograms, is a massive amount of material that suggests there were a lot of people there living for quite some time. To end the story, I've already mentioned our colleague Yorgos passed away last year. He was 86, had a long, wonderful, healthy life. But we were fortunate enough to be able to present him with the book before he died. And he was overjoyed to learn that the book, which came out in his honor and that honors his memory and really was his work that we were just fortunate enough to be a part of, came out before he passed away. So I've really just, it's been an absolute joy of my life to be able to work on this project. And I'm so happy to have had the opportunity to share some of the results of our research with you. I could talk about this obviously forever, but I know we're all doing Zoom these days, and I'm gonna call it here. So thank you so much for your attention, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk to you about this very exciting research project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This has been a very exciting presentation. I was sending texts back and forth with Connie, and she was equally excited. And we basically concluded the same thing, that this was a very engaging presentation. Thank you so much, and we really appreciate the time you gave us on this one. I guess a couple of questions, and I will probably start. Let me start with the one that comes natural. I think you hinted to that at the very end. So where do we go from here?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's many ways to answer it. One is, you know, it's tough times right now in Greece, and my colleagues, for example, who work at the ministry, their salaries have been cut, in some cases well over 40%. People are being forced into retirement. They are understaffed and extremely overworked and very underpaid. So it's very difficult for me to lean on them to continue to do more. Obviously, this is the site of a lifetime. You know, and this is the site of many lifetimes, not just Yorgos's lifetime, but it could be me and several other people's lifetimes too. One of the good things about all of this is that they received a very large grant from the European community to reinvigorate the entire shoreline around Diros Bay, which is very important for the local community. They want to open the cave up for tourism again, and they're going to do it very carefully. And as part of that, they're going to tear down the very old museum that was very dilapidated and leaking, and it was just a horrible, horrible space that had just suffered from years of neglect. And they're going to rebuild a new museum. And so where we are right now, where our team is right now, is we're going to wait. My colleague Anastasia is the person at the ministry who's in charge of the entire development. And so her time is just spent meeting with architects and contractors and engineers to get that project off the ground. And then after that is done, then we would like to continue our work in the region. In the meantime, we still have a lot to write up. You know, we like to say in archaeology that, you know, for every hour you spend in the field, you spend at least 4 hours working up the material, trying to get it published. And so we're working on other articles and other publications about the site. The other thing that we need to do is expand the survey area and really know more about the Mani and really understand a broader chunk of Mani and whether these sites are truly exceptional or whether, I mean, obviously Alepotrypa is very exceptional, but whether there are other settlements in the region that were contributing to it. Because we do know that those people inside the cave were coming from all over the Eastern Mediterranean. It wasn't just local families that were being deposited inside the cave. People were coming from very long ways to deposit chunks of relatives or relatives inside the cave.
And how exactly do we know that? And I'm asking that because there is a similar question that, you know, these days Greeks are very sensitive to where we come from and how we identify ourselves separate from other people in our neighborhood. So was there, for example, DNA testing done or any other kind of forensics?
Well, the problem with DNA is that it's not, you know, when DNA first came out, ancient DNA, everybody thought, oh, it's the best thing since sliced bread, right? And it's going to answer all of our questions. We're going to know everything. It turns out DNA is as much an art, especially ancient DNA sequencing, is as much an art as it is a hard science. And the other problem is that people were mixing up their genes, if you know what I mean, in all different kinds of ways for a very long time. So DNA won't necessarily tell you where people come from, but fortunately you are what you eat. And one of the things that you eat and you ingest is strontium. Strontium in water that you ingest is filtered through rocks. And that strontium can change throughout your life. And that strontium gives you a geological signature of where you are and where you came from. And what we know is that the strontium signatures from people inside the cave are all over the map. They're not just local. They go well beyond even the most diverse Middle Paleolithic groups that are very mobile and moving around a lot. They go well beyond the kind of diversity that we see within those groups. So it's from the strontium that we can see that people are moving around and they're not all locals. Great question.
We have another question that touches somewhat to the same subject, but the question is basically, since that land, as you previously said, is pretty inhospitable to say the least, or somehow it's rough. Why exactly do you think that people congregated there, or it became the epicenter of these activities?
Well, you know, people throughout the Neolithic lived all over Greece. They dealt with aridity. They, you know, some areas were probably more seasonally inhabited than others. You know, in the winter there's more water generally than in the summer. You know, Messenia's got tons of water, so there were people there all year round. What is obvious here as the draw was the lake. It's obvious that people were drawn to this because, you know, I mean, one of the great things about working in a cave in Mani in July is that it's always 70 degrees inside the cave. It's wonderful. It's wonderful, you know, and there's fresh water there. So people were using it. And actually during the end of the Neolithic period, what we find in front of the cave are huge pithoi. These are huge storage vessels. You know, that are several feet tall, that were being positioned under water drips in the front of the cave. And so they're collecting fresh water inside this cave. between that and the use of the cave traditionally throughout different periods of human prehistory for burials, I think it caught on and it gained its own momentum. And what we can see is that that ritual place became very important. And sometime around 4000 BC, it exploded because everything we find outside the cave is around 4000 BC, which is the same time that we see the punch of activity inside the cave and outside the cave. And this is something we're finding more and more, is that going back to why do cities form, we always used to think that people were forced together for defense and forced together because of all these things. Turns out people are pulled to these places just as frequently as they're pushed, if not more. People are pulled to these places because there's a there. There's something going on in these places that people want to be a part of. And that's what we're seeing here, but it doesn't last.
Along the same lines again, and just based on what you said, do you expect, as you study more this site, do you expect to understand better customs and besides the main findings, additional information about life at that time?
Absolutely. And you know, I mean, that I showed you that picture of that structure located on the promontory outside the cave. That is the only final Neolithic structure in southern Greece. You know, we're very fortunate that they built those agricultural terraces outside the cave, because when they built them, they frequently mounded over certain deposits. They cut into others, but in some instances, they mounded over and preserved those deposits that usually are eroded and gone. They're very difficult to find in other parts of the Peloponnese. So this site is exceptional in how well preserved human remains are inside the cave, and also how well preserved architecture and animal bones are outside the cave.
Excellent. We have one more question that I guess it has to do very much with how this whole thing came to an end. And it's pretty much like, do we have any sense what happened? Were people trapped in there? Was the entrance forcefully closed? Or is there anything that can lead us to that, or research along these lines?
So there are individuals inside the cave that were not buried. Part of the problem here is that when the Greek Office of Tourism decided to create the sound and light show, and they started literally blasting out with dynamite the entire interior of the cave, a lot of damage was done. And so a lot of the earliest reports of how things were found are coming second or third hand through workmen, which is a problem. But we do know that there are some individuals, mostly children, that were not buried inside the cave. They weren't placed in pits, they were on the surface. And in fact, I showed a skull, it was a child's skull, that has calcium carbonate, which drips off the ceiling of the cave. That means it was sitting on the surface. It wasn't buried. And that led Yorgos early on to suggest that people were trapped in there. We can't demonstrate that people were trapped in there. It is possible. What we do know is that something catastrophic happened, likely an earthquake. It was likely an earthquake that collapsed the front of the cave and that kept it shut until the 20th century, which is why it was so well preserved. We can't say whether there were people trapped inside, but it is a possibility that people were trapped inside.
Excellent. We don't want to take up any more of your time. I know you can speak for hours about that, and I'm sure in the future we should have another presentation so you can give us more information about this and other work you do, because you're a great presenter and we really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk. Like I said, it's really nice change in pace, and I wish I could be there in person, but maybe next year, right?
We say the same thing. Thank you very much, and we thank all our friends who were with us tonight. We'll see you soon, hopefully, with another presentation, hopefully as fascinating as this. Thank you very much. Have a very good night.